Please tell us your names, what your backgrounds are, and what you've been doing for the last 20 years.
My name is Ayesha Sherzai. I'm a neurologist and a scientist, and along with my husband, Dean, I'm the co-director of the Brain Health and Alzheimer's Prevention Program at Loma University Health. I trained at Columbia University in vascular neurology, which is treatment and prevention of stroke. And my research and my interest is in preventive neurology, which is prevention of neurological diseases such as Alzheimer's disease and stroke, especially when it comes to lifestyle.
My name is Dean Sherzai. I'm Ayesha's husband first. I'm a neurologist, I'm a neuroscientist, and I'm co-director of Alzheimer's Prevention Program at Loma University. My research is, again, same thing, prevention of neurological diseases. We've been working at this for many, many years. And my special focus and my fellowship training is in dementia and Alzheimer's.
Tell me what your book is about, The Alzheimer's Solution, a breakthrough program to prevent and reverse the symptoms of cognitive decline at every age.
The book is a book of hope and a book of science. It has to be both. So we're not just throwing hope without any true scientific backing. This came out of years of work we did at Loma University, which is the only blue zone in America. We chose to go there to study the population and then also do research outside to figure out the effect of lifestyle on specifically dementia, this devastating tsunami that's overtaking our healthcare system and will actually, in 20 years, collapse the healthcare system. How do we avoid it? And what we have found is that lifestyle, specifically a whole food plant-based lifestyle, plus other things, can significantly reduce your risk of developing dementia in general and Alzheimer's in particular. So we thought that this was extremely important to come out. It's a book of hope. And in this book, we're not selling any vitamin concoctions or anything. It's a much more comprehensive, real-life approach to prevention.
In today's society, is Alzheimer's disease considered an epidemic?
I think there's rarely any family that hasn't come across Alzheimer's or dementia.
And that's going to increase much more in the next 20 years. Yeah. In fact, it's the fastest growing epidemic in America. Whereas in the last 15 years, we are surviving diabetes better. Although the prevalence is increasing, we're surviving heart disease and everything. Mortality from Alzheimer's has gone up by 123%. And that curve is actually increasing faster. So we have to do something about it, and the cure is not going to be in a pill. It's too complex of a disease. It's going to be in communities approaching this from a lifestyle perspective.
What is your background and day-to-day job, and what made you decide to focus on Alzheimer's?
So we decided to go into this field of neurology, both of us, because we're fascinated by the brain. The brain is an incredible organ, but also because we have personally seen loved ones go through Alzheimer's. Dean had two grandparents, and I had two grandparents, both from mother and father side, who went through Alzheimer's disease, and we saw how these incredible human beings lost parts of themselves slowly and gradually to the point where they couldn't recognize their children or their grandchildren. And I saw the pain that my families went through. And it was fascinating to see such intelligent, incredibly amazing human beings, lose islands of consciousness. And that brought us into the field to understand the brain better. And when we went into this field as trainees, as residents, and as fellows, I think I'm going to speak for both of us. The field is so grim and hopeless that you get dissatisfied. You basically see people coming in with disease, usually at end stage, and there's really no medication for it. There's no hope for it. And I recall during my residency and fellowship with brochures of nursing homes or end-of-life care on our tables ready to hand out to people when they would come in with dementias and Alzheimer's disease. But then throughout our residencies and fellowships, we started reading about successful cognitive aging and about places where people have the least incidence and prevalence of diseases of the brain. And that intrigued us, and we started learning more about it and reading more about it. That's how we came across Dr. T. Colin Campbell's work from the China study, Dr. Esselstyn's work, and then read articles by Dan Buettner, who's a good friend now, about the concept of blue zones. And we found out that Loma Linda University was in Southern California, and we just jumped on that opportunity. I even remember days when we wanted to go to lifestyle, to study lifestyle better and how that relates to neurological diseases. And I remember our mentors telling us, I don't think you're going to do very well in that field. I don't think your grant is ever going to get accepted because it's a very vague field. But I'm so glad we made that decision, because I think that is the only hope. That is the only solution. Lifestyle is the only solution for Alzheimer's disease, and we've been studying it for the past decade, and we've seen it over and over again in our clinic, in our hospital work, of how wonderful the results are of instituting a healthy lifestyle early on.
We saw the negative approach to disease in really well-known institutions, UCSD, NIH. I worked at experimental therapeutics branch of NIH, doing all kind of molecular stuff, and study after study. Clinical trial after clinical trial was a failure, over and over again. And it was almost as if people just kept doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different result. We've heard that. We needed to go a different direction. We wanted to find out, were there models of lifestyle affecting other diseases? Heart disease, cancer. And that's where we found out about Loma Linda. We said the part that has not been studied so far was the brain. So for the last 15 years, we've been studying the brain in communities where they've had successful aging. And now we lead a campaign in beach cities where the whole three communities are instituting this lifestyle perspective. Yeah. For us, it's a privilege. I mean, in life, you want to do something that is of meaning. And often it's challenging because it's often outside of the norm. It's often outside of what people are used to. And in medicine is a very old system, very patriarchal system in many ways. So if you're doing things that are outside of the norm, you're pretty much chastised. Grants are not given, money is not supplied. But we took that risk, and it's paying off, because what we saw was that lifestyle actually prevented dementia. And I'll tell you, there is nothing bigger in healthcare than that right now.
Is sleep a factor in the prevention of Alzheimer's, and how about exercise as well?
I think when it comes to sleep, there's nothing more important for cleansing of the brain than that. It sounds funny, but sleep is probably the most important time of the day. I know we're knocked out and we're unconscious, but two very important things happen when we're asleep. The first thing that happens is our memories get consolidated. So all the information that comes to us during the day gets placed in the metaphorical file, folder, and cabinet. And that's how we can retrieve them later without any, spending too much energy. That happens when people go through the deep stages of sleep. The second thing that happens is the brain cleanses itself. We have these cells, microglia, or the janitor cells, that get activated when we sleep. And they go and they start eating up the garbage material that is produced during the day. Remember, the brain is the most active organ in the body. It never sleeps. We sleep, but the brain never sleeps. So imagine the amount of garbage and the byproducts that are produced. So the janitor cells get rid of them. But when people are sleep deprived, or if they have a broken pattern of sleep, these cells go nuts. They go haywire. They start eating at the healthy parts of the brain. And that's why chronic sleep deprivation actually shrinks the brain. People have smaller brains and they have memory problems. So the way we say it in our clinic, forget about all the spas and all the detox programs. Just work on getting a good night's sleep. The best spa in your life is your bedroom. Make sure that you actually institute sleep hygiene as early as possible, because otherwise your memories are going to get affected, and it actually causes a lot of other health issues like cardiac issues too.
Brain shrinkage. I mean, we spent thousands of dollars on all kinds of health measures. When we were in Los Angeles, people would come with all kinds of detox from every pore you can imagine. Gruesome at times. But We tell them there's only two types of detox we know of. One is water. People are not drinking enough water. The second is sleep. The ultimate detox for the brain is sleep. So if you're going to invest in any spa, any detox, make your bedroom into the ultimate spa. Noise cancellation, light cancellation, temperature regulation, making sure that you know about foods that interfere with sleep, making sure that you know about the environmental factors that interfere with sleep, and making sure that you know about the behavioral bad habits that you've developed throughout the years that will interfere with sleep. If you take care of those, you won't need the massive amounts of medication that people are using. So sleep to us is probably the most important 8 hours of the day, ironically speaking. So the brain has two major drivers. The limbic system, the emotional brain, which actually deals with the past a lot. It gets information. The past is given in different kinds of weight of emotion. And the frontal lobe that projects forward. It's not independent of each other, but they're projecting forward. So do you see the connection there? One is pulling you forward, the other is pulling you back. You're never in the present. So what sleep does is calm those systems down and actually takes it out of the formula. And what's left is the pure you. I know that we're getting a little soft, but scientifically speaking, it actually allows the brain to function as a whole, not as one part pulling forward, one part pulling back. It almost is a tearing apart of the ego of the person, and sleep does that. So part of that was consolidating a memory, into the file. The other part is just that, allowing the frontal lobe to rest, allowing the limbic system to rest. So what comes out is the totality. That's critical. Sleep is a high energy state. So people think you sleep, the brain just calms down. It's working. In fact, the most important part of its work is it has to go through those phases of sleep. And if it doesn't go through those phases of sleep, you could be out for 10 hours. Yet the brain is fatigued, overwhelmed. In fact, they found that people who sleep 9 to 10 hours, they actually are poorer in health. Why? Because they needed to sleep 9 to 10 hours because during those 9 to 10 hours, they weren't getting those deep sleep cycles. That makes sleep the most important part of your day for all the things that we said. Consolidation, ego consolidation, calming the mind down, as well as detoxification. So invest in sleep.
Does mental stimulation really make a difference in preventing Alzheimer's?
Oh, you answered that.
Yes.
That's his favorite topic.
Yeah. As much as we would like to say nutrition is the most important thing, and it is. How could it not be? You're putting things that are making and breaking the brain every 4 to 5 times a day. As much as we would like to say exercise, and exercise is, and we'll talk about how important exercise is, but the most protective thing for the brain is mental activity throughout life. We call it cognitive reserve, the bank account. There's the brain reserve, which is the brain you're left with after the age of 5. Whatever happened before, the genetics, there's actually apoptosis, programmed cell death, where there's actually, you lose more cells at that time than ever afterwards. And then this infrastructure that's left is the reserve.
It's pruning of the brain.
Of the brain, yeah, cleaning up. Then after 5, whatever knowledge you've acquired, whatever challenges you've put your brain in, creates connectivity. That connectivity is protection, profound protection. Let me give you an example. When people compare the brain to a muscle, it's such a disservice to the brain. Biggest guy you know is 3 times bigger than average. Let's give the numbers on the brain. You have about 87 billion neurons. Now, they can make a couple of connections each neuron, or as many as 30,000 connections. That's no muscle. That's not even Hulk. That's a massive growth. And how do you achieve that? Mental activity throughout life. We use education as a bystander for that because it's easy to say 3 years of college, 4 years of this. But actually, the more important thing, people who have actually maintained cognitive challenge, be it running a challenging business that they loved, be it being a musician, a violinist for orchestra, be it, linguist, multiple languages, be it a writer, complex behaviors that actually challenges your brain continuously. Repetitive behavior is not that. Things that continually change. And the third factor actually, is it has to be purpose-driven. Because if it's not enjoyed, it actually does the opposite. It damages the brain. So imagine you're doing some job that you love, and it's challenging continuously because you're making it challenging. Your brain is so protected that it could withstand even the pathology of Alzheimer's. And a big study, the nun study, showed that.
Yes.
So the nun study, these nuns, several hundred of them, volunteered their writings, their body, their blood, even their brain after death to this study. So when they died, they did autopsy of their brain, and they collected their writings. And what they found was, there was a group that had lots of pathology of Alzheimer's. The brain was shrunken, lots of amyloid plaques and everything, yet during life they had no Alzheimer's. This threw everybody for a loop. But another group that had minimal pathology, the brain was pretty nice looking, not much amyloid, had profound Alzheimer's during life. What happened? So let's look in their blood, let's look at their writing, everything. When they looked at their writing, of course, nuns mostly have the same level of education, so education is out. But they looked at their writing. The ones that were protected despite the pathology had much more sophisticated language, much broader vocabulary, much more well-read, and they were much more involved in their communities. So a task that involved them in the communities, their language, actually protected them even against the pathology of Alzheimer's. That was the beginning of a complete different paradigm. So it's not just because you developed some amyloid or some vascular factor. How much have you challenged your brain? That determines the greatest amount of protection. I tell them about the taxi driver study,
Sure.
which is a very cool study.
It's related to the importance of cognitive activity for the brain. So there was a study that was done that's actually called the London Taxi Driver Study. And scientists wanted to find out what was the effect of intense cognitive activity, like memorizing a test for becoming a taxi driver in London, did to the brain. If people who have lived in London, if you've visited London, you know that the streets are nothing like in Chicago or New York. You know, there's no rules to them. It's like somebody just, glued a bunch of yarn on a paper. There's no pattern to it.
People from London are going to be very happy with you.
I love you, Londoners, but your roads are incredibly difficult to memorize. So London taxi drivers have to go through this gruesome test of memorizing the different paths, back then, of course, and they go through a test, and the percentage of people who pass is not very high. So they compared people who scored very well on this test versus those who didn't score very well, and versus people who actually didn't even take the test. And they found out that people who took the test and went through learning for this test and getting their license actually had a bigger brain after learning, and they also did very, very well as far as their memory is concerned in neuropsychological testing. And we're talking about individuals 50 years and above. So even at that stage in life, it is quite possible for one to expand their areas of memory and to get better scoring in their memory test by putting their mind through, challenges like learning, the map routes or anything for that matter.
So if I'm hearing you, it's almost never too late to start using your brain if you haven't already been regularly.
Absolutely.
Not only is it never too late, it's critical, because the connectivity happens throughout life. You don't grow many new neurons, although there's some controversy, are we growing new neurons or not? Even if we are, and there's some evidence, it's nominal. But what we are doing throughout life is connections. And that happens at 90, 100, or beyond. And it involves mental activity, challenging mental activity.
How does sitting at a computer all day affect Alzheimer's?
I think in several ways. One is if you're just sitting on a computer doing something that's stressful but not purpose-driven and it's repetitive, by itself is damaging. If you're just sitting, it's incredibly damaging. There are studies that show that people who do half an hour of aerobic exercise throughout the day, yet then go sit for 8 hours, it just negated all that benefit. In fact, the three things that we say for exercise is, one is more aerobic exercise than you thought. 25 to 30 minutes of aerobic exercise to the point where you're tired 4 to 5 days a week. The second thing is move throughout the day. Don't just, you've done the exercise, then you sit for 8 hours. Every hour, get up, stretch, walk, do that kind of stuff. And third is leg strength. If you're going to do any weight training exercises, and if you have no time for any other exercises, leg strength. Because the leg strength seems to be associated with brain strength. So, but all of it comes back to legs. Stand up, move. Don't just sit in front of a computer for hours at a time. It actually has significant long-term harm.
Is there a correlation with the legs and the brain because of the circulation?
That's one factor, yes. So the biggest pumps in our body are our legs. It's not even the heart. We have the biggest muscles in our legs, and when we exercise them, certain growth hormones like BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and others are secreted. And these growth factors are responsible for the connections that Dean was talking about earlier, for making connections between neurons, brain cells, and giving brain that resilience it needs later in life. So it's incredibly important for the legs to be stronger. And we tell people, if you had to choose an exercise for brain health, focus on your legs. Focus on making your legs really, really strong.